Hello everyone, this is the last video this week. In this video, I am discussing the advantages and disadvantages of the repricing model. First of all, this model is simple, as we have seen in the last video, that for a financial institution, we calculate the assets and liabilities in each maturity basket, for example, in the 1 month, 3 months, or 6 months, and we find out the gap between the values of assets and liabilities in each maturity bucket, multiply them by the interest rate changes to find out the effect of interest rate change on the net interest income. Due to its simplicity, regulatory authorities want financial institutions to calculate their interest rate risk exposure by this model. The information provided by this repricing gap model also has importance in terms of capital adequacy purposes. For example, as we have seen in the last video also, that the repricing gap is calculated as a percentage of total asset. That gives an important information that how much is the interest rate risk exposure in relation to the total asset of a financial institution. Now, if this repricing risk is higher, or the interest rate risk is higher, that will require the financial institutions to allocate more resources to reduce their interest rate risk exposure. So this information has also important value. However, the repricing model has several weaknesses. For example, market value effects, over-aggregation, run-offs, and ignore off-balance sheet effects. First of all is market value effects. As we have discussed previously, that interest rate changes have a market value effect in addition to an income effect on asset and liability values. This is that is, in addition to the change in interest received or interest paid due to the change in interest rates, the change in interest rate also has an impact on the market values. As we previously learned, the value of assets and liabilities are the present value of future cash flows. And as interest rate changes, the required rate of return changes, discount rate changes, so the present value of cash flow changes. As a result, most of the assets and liability value will change with the change in interest rate. However, the repricing model is a book value based model, so it does not consider the change in market value of assets and liabilities due to change in interest rates. The next problem is over-aggregation. We previously have seen that in a case of financial institution, they calculate different maturity buckets of assets and liabilities, and each maturity bucket includes similar maturity assets and liabilities. For example, a 3 to 6 months bucket will include assets and liabilities. Those are maturing over 6 months. Now, the repricing model assumes that assets and liabilities in a certain maturity bucket are maturing at the same time. Okay. For example, when it's a 3 to 6 months bucket, it assumes that all the assets and liabilities are maturing at the same time. That means, say, at the end of 6 months. However, it might be possible that assets are maturing at a certain time and liabilities are maturing in a different time in the same maturity bucket. For example, assets are maturing in the beginning of the period and liabilities are maturing at the end of the period, instead of maturing at the same time. But simple repricing gap model does not consider this. As a result, the effect of interest rate changes cannot be accurately calculated by the repricing model. The next is the run-offs. The simple repricing gap model that we are considering in this chapter assumes that the assets and liabilities in a certain maturity bucket maturing at the same time, as I have discussed in the last point. However, even in the same maturity bucket, the assets and assets of the similar maturities may not mature at the same time. For example, if it's a 10-year fixed rate loan buckets, we assume that all the loans will be maturing in 10 years. However, some of those loans may have already passed 5 years, so only 5 years left. So they will be maturing in 5 years' time, whereas some other loans may be maturing in 6 years, 7 years, 8 years, or so on. This is one point. Another point is in the case of loans, the borrowers sometimes have incentive to repay the loan before the maturity. So that also the case that the loans will be maturing less than its stipulated maturity period. So this the point is also ignored by the simple repricing gap model. As a result, it cannot accurately calculate interest rate risk exposure. And last of all, as I said, that repricing gap model is a book value based model. So it considers the changes in the value of book values of assets and liabilities due to change in interest rates. However, the interest rate changes has also important impact on the off-balance sheet items. Those are not reported in the balance sheet, but repricing gap model does not consider the changes in the off-balance sheet items for the change in interest rates. So these are the weaknesses of the repricing model. In the next week, we will be discussing the duration model. That's another model for estimating interest rate risk exposure of financial institutions. Thank you very much.